All right, guys, so this video lecture is going to be all about land acquisitions, which basically is just kind of, how did the United States grow and expand, and how did we get each area of land? So what we're really going to be talking about today is westward expansion and manifest destiny. So here's our important vocabulary for this lesson. The first one is westward expansion, and this basically means the time period where the United States is acquiring land and expanding west. Manifest destiny is the belief that the United States should stretch from the Atlantic to the Pacific Ocean. Now, a lot of times kids get westward expansion and manifest destiny mixed up, but if you can try to remember that westward expansion is a time period and manifest destiny is a belief, that should help you keep those straight. Couple of other vocabulary words that are important to this lesson is annexation, and that basically just means to add a territory, and then ceded, or to cede something, basically means that you are giving something away or that you have been given something. So on your map side of your paper, what you will want to do is make sure that you write up at the top your vocabulary words for westward expansion and manifest destiny. And then there's a couple of things that you want to label before we jump into talking about the first area of land. You want to make sure that you label the Pacific Ocean, the Gulf of Mexico, and then the Atlantic Ocean. And now with a green marker or green colored pencil or some sort of pen, you want to outline, just like I have right here, this area in green, okay? And basically what this area is representing is the United States in 1783. On here, you also want to label the Mississippi River. Remember, the Mississippi River forms the border between about 11 different states, and it basically runs right through here where I'm running my mouse. And then you also want to label the Appalachian Mountains, just so that you can be reminded. So the name of the territory that we're talking about right now is basically just the United States, and the year that it was established, 1783. If you look back on that map, the area that I have outlined in green is basically what the United States looked like in 1783. Now, at that time, we didn't really have a president. Washington isn't going to take office until 1790. So we are under the Articles of Confederation as our first form of government. And how did we get this land? Well, this is post-Revolutionary War United States. And so the boundaries are the Atlantic Ocean in the east and then the Mississippi River in the west. Now, on to our next land area that we acquired. Okay, you want to take a yellow marker and outline right here. And you're going to be outlining the Louisiana Purchase. Make sure that you label that and include the year as well. So when you are finished, this is what your map should look like. And now, the Louisiana Territory. We acquired that land in 1803. Thomas Jefferson was the president during that time. And if you remember, we've kind of already talked about the Louisiana Purchase. This was purchased through a treaty with France. And Jefferson was kind of on the fence about whether or not to purchase this area. He really wanted to expand the United States. But nowhere in the Constitution did it actually give the president the power to purchase land. So he justified purchasing the Louisiana Territory from France by saying that he was creating a treaty with the country, okay? And at this time, Napoleon, the great emperor, needed money to fund his war in Europe. So he sells off the Louisiana Territory, uses that money to continue fighting his war in Europe, and the Louisiana Purchase is going to end up doubling the size of the country. And then you know that Thomas Jefferson sent out Lewis and Clark so that they could kind of explore and document the land area. Now, the next area that we gained is Florida. So you'll take a red marker and outline this area down here. We gained this territory in 1819. So flipping to the back side of your map, you'll fill in the table with the following information. The name of the territory is Florida. The year that we acquired it is 1819. The president during this time period was James Monroe. Now, this land was ceded or given to us by Spain through the Adams-Onis Treaty. Now, remember, Andrew Jackson invaded Florida during this time, and he did this kind of on his own. It's kind of up in the air whether or not James Monroe approved of Andrew Jackson's invasion of Florida. But he was invading Florida so that he could regain slaves that had escaped the Deep South and were taking refuge in a Native American fort in northern Florida. But at this time, when Andrew Jackson invades, Spain is really too busy trying to keep control of its colonies in Latin America. So they basically are just okay with the United States taking over the area of Florida. So John Quincy Adams and Onis come together and they create the treaty, which cedes the Florida territory to the United States. Now, the next land area that we acquire is Texas. So I took a brown marker here and I outlined this area and then labeled it as the Texas annexation in 1845. So flipping to the back side of your paper, you'll have the Texas annexation. We get this in 1845. The president during this time period is James K. Polk. Now, this area was annexed or added by Congress through a vote. Okay, now if you recall, when we were studying James Monroe, Spain was losing a lot of its colonies in South America and Central America. One of those colonies was actually Mexico. They gained their independence from Spain in 1821. And at this time, the area of Texas is considered a province of Mexico, which basically just means that it's an area where Mexican settlers can move to. Now, not only are Mexican settlers moving into the area of Texas, but so are American settlers. And in the beginning, Mexico was okay with having American settlers moving into the area of Texas, as long as they abided by Mexican law. Now, as more Mexican settlers move into the Texas area, conflict is going to arise between the Tejanos, which are people who were born in Texas from Mexican descent, and the American settlers. Those two groups of people are going to end up clashing. And some of them are going to even talk about the idea of the area of Texas being its own country. And that eventually ends up happening. Texas is going to declare independence from Mexico, but Mexico never officially recognizes Texan independence. They still consider Texas as part of Mexico, which is kind of odd because Texas becomes its own country for 9 years before Congress votes to annex it to the United States. And the reason why Congress wanted to vote to annex Texas into the United States is because Texas is full of rich, fertile farmland, and all of those southern planters in Alabama and Mississippi and Georgia and the Carolinas, they're all starting to run out of viable land to produce cash crops. So they start looking west, and that includes the area of Texas. So Texas at the time, also when they were an independent country, were kind of bankrupt, and they were dealing with a lot of Native American raids from the Navajo and the Comanche Indians. And they had a really hard time kind of controlling those raids and protecting themselves. So the people of Texas knew that if they would be annexed by the United States, they would be offered more protection. So in 1845, Congress is going to vote to add Texas to the United States, and the area of Texas becomes part of the United States. Now, the next area of land that we acquire is Oregon country, and I took an orange marker and outlined the area up here in orange, labeled it labeled it Oregon country, and put the date of 1846 in that area. Now, on your chart, you'll want to go ahead and fill that in with the following information. Okay, so we've got Oregon country is the name of our territory. The United States is going to acquire that land in 1846 under the presidency of James K. Polk. Now, the area of Oregon country had already been explored by Lewis and Clark in the early 1800s, so about 43 years prior to adding the Oregon Country to the United States. And we added this area through an agreement with Britain. Now, at first, we have 4 nations that are all claiming this area as part of their country. We have Russia, Spain, Britain, and the United States all claiming the Oregon Country. Eventually, Russia and Spain drop out. Remember, Spain loses all of those Latin American colonies, and at one time had basically controlled much of the western portion of the United States, even all the way up into areas of modern day Oregon and Washington state. But as Spain loses those colonies, they also lose that area. Russia drops out too. Again, they're kind of on the other side of the world at this time, and they don't really have a very strong claim to the area. So the United States and Britain are claiming Oregon Country, and they actually end up reaching an agreement where they decide what the boundary line is going to be, because you have British Columbia and Canada, which is just north of Washington state, and Washington state is part of Oregon Country. So in 1846, the United States is going to reach an agreement with Britain. It's going to establish that boundary line between the United States and then British Columbia. Now, the next area of land that we acquire is what's called the Mexican Cession. And we're going to carve out 7 states from the Mexican Cession. So we're going to have California, Nevada, Utah, portions of Wyoming and Colorado, and Arizona and New Mexico as well. And I took a blue or a purple marker here in this section, okay, and outlined it, labeled it as the Mexican Cession, and included my date of 1848 in there. Now, the Mexican Cession was acquired by the United States in 1848, again, under the presidency of James K. Polk. And this area was ceded or given to us by Mexico through the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. Now, this treaty comes after a war. After the United States annexes Texas, Mexico is outraged. Okay. Remember, Mexico never actually recognized Texan independence. They still felt like Texas was a part of Mexico, even though Texas was its own country for 9 years. So when the United States added Texas to our country, Mexico is outraged. They're so upset that how could we take Mexican territory and add it to our country? Eventually, a border dispute between the Nueces River and the Rio Grande is going to lead to the Mexican-American War. And the Mexican-American War is won by the United States, and we established the Rio Grande as the border between the United States and Mexico. And Mexico is going to give us the rest of that area right there in the Southwest that we have called the Mexican Cession. And when we sign the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo, we're at the point where manifest destiny is almost finally achieved. Now, the last area that was added to the United States is this tiny little area down here. Okay, I took a blue marker and outlined that area, labeled it the Gadsden Purchase, 1853. So on the back side of your chart, you'll fill in the name of the territory, which is the Gadsden Purchase, the year that we acquired it, which is in 1853. Now, the president at this time was Millard Fillmore. Okay? And we purchased this area from Mexico in order to complete a railroad. We were building several different railroads that would stretch from the east to the west. And we were in the process of building a railroad and really needed to acquire the rest of that tiny sliver of land from Mexico so that we could complete a railroad. Now, once the Gadsden Purchase is made in 1853, many Americans believed that manifest destiny was finally achieved. Remember, manifest destiny is the belief that the United States was destined to stretch from the East Coast, okay, from the Atlantic Ocean all the way across the country to the Pacific Ocean. Now, the backside of your chart should look very similar to this, okay? And then you should have the whole front side of your chart all colored in and labeled. And what you will want to do now is use these notes, not the Google, Use these notes to complete the land acquisitions worksheet that is in Canvas. If you have any questions, make sure that you reach out and ask.